from the commissioners on the consent agenda?
Motion to approve?
I'll second.
Motion made by Matt and seconded by Bob to approve the consent agenda as proposed. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Consent agenda is approved. Agenda item number 3, approve financial statements, and I'll turn that over to Jared and Jeremy.
Couple things. Our cash didn't go up as much as you'd think with a good net income because we had to make interest payments on the bonds last month. So that was roughly $400,000, $170 to gas, $230 to the electric. Other things to mention. You'll notice our transmission costs were a little higher. It was really warm there at the end of May. So looking to pump that up. Plus our transmission the year before was low, a little lower than average. So that takes up what it looks like it's way higher. Other than that, sales for resale of the Dynasty contract, that's what we had to help with the electric division. Gas, the bottom line was pretty similar. That's just because less revenue was offset by the less costs. That's about all I have.
I just had a couple things. Speaking of the Dynasty, June, if you guys recall, at the end of June will be the last month of that contract. We did not extend that because we're going to be pulling that unit 1 out here at the end of August. So you'll see one more month of sales for resales in the June's financials. And then that will be on hold until we get the unit back. So just keep that in mind. And then on the electric side, the load was up a little bit, not as much as I had thought with the warm heat we had the last couple weeks of May particularly. Our residential was up, which wasn't a surprise. Our small general was up. On the all-electric class, we had about 10 customers that were down in that class, but the rest were up, and so some of those were bigger all-electric users. So that ultimately was lower than last May because of just a handful of customers. I thought maybe it was going to be more of a system-wide thing, but it was just a handful of customers that really have more load in their homes or bigger homes. So that had a little variance there. And then in the large general, Minnesota Specialties, they were running one fermenter more this year than last year. Last year they were running both fermenters a little bit more. So you are starting to see a little bit more of fluctuation based on their production scale with yeast. That really has an impact in that class because when they're running both fermenters, their load is significantly higher. So that decrease this year was pretty, I think it was about 85-90% of that reduction was just the one customer just running the one fermenter. So otherwise industrial was back up. So otherwise things look pretty good. The balance sheet, Jared talked about the interest income or interest expense. We paid about $700,000. Otherwise the cash balance looked okay. Nothing really significant on the investment report to talk about. So otherwise it was kind of moving forward as we had projected. So any questions on anything in particular?
Good to see electrical consumption bounce back a little bit.
Yep. I guess the other point to note, just popped in my mind, is the power cost adjustment on the electric side. So we didn't have a power cost adjustment for May. Again, just to keep things in front of you guys, May will be our last month of the spring rates. So next month of June, July, and August will be the summer rates, and they significantly go up. So there's potential for some power cost adjustments. Although if you look at the May's power cost adjustment, we actually added $263,000 to the rate stabilization fund. Outside the transmission, the actual energy cost was comparably low. So we were able to bump up a little bit more of that rate stabilization fund. So we're up to about $739,000 in there at the end of May. So I would anticipate we may get through June or July without a power cost adjustment before we get down below that $400,000 threshold where we may have to bump it up. So that was a nice surprise. I didn't think we'd have that big of a amount going in the rate stabilization fund. So that's, I think, something worth noting as we watch that piece. That's probably one of the bigger ones we've seen added in the last several years for the spring. So that's a good thing for the customers that next couple of months we may be able to get by without having to pass on some of that. So.
Commissioners, have any questions on the financials for Jeremy or Jared?
Nope.
I'll make a motion to approve the financial statements.
I'll second.
I have a motion by Kathy, second by Matt, to approve the financial statements as presented. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Financial statements are approved. Thank you, Jeremy and Jared. Next agenda item number 4 is open forum, where the public is welcome to address the commission, and I don't see anybody here for that. So we will move on to agenda item number 5, communication from the departments and city administrators not here today.
Correct.
So we'll move on to divisions. Dan.
Nothing to do. I have nothing to do. Just a short report. First, I'd like to introduce Mr. Bryce Roosh. He's our crew chief of the transmission. He's here today as he's heavily involved with our transmission line, the interconnect station. He wanted to sit in for the bid opening to see what it was all about. So, thank you. Only other thing I want to report is we finished our NINOPS inspection last week. They were here 3 different days. The first day primarily was doing records research. Second day, like a week or 2 later, was they wanted to see our entire pipeline. So we started off down in Trimont and looked at dirt. And then last week they were in looking at manuals. They reviewed our control room management program as well as our operation and maintenance manual and emergency plan. Found discrepancies, so we're passing over. And that's all.
Thank you, John. Welcome, Bryce.
I don't have anything.
Okay. Human resources, Angie, anything?
I am just finishing up a couple of the open positions that we have going on right now.
Okay.
Getting close to finalizing those.
Good. Mark, anything from legal?
Nothing today.
And general manager?
Just a few things, just wrapped up some public comments on the carbon-free 2040 standard. So MRS and I were working back and forth on putting together joint comments, not only for the membership, but then also for us. We have a little bit of uniqueness within that membership since we're not a full requirement of them. So the closing today for the public comment section, or the public comment period, is today, 4:30, so we'll be submitting those. So just been working through some of that. Hopefully they'll make some recommendation changes based on the comments they got back with some compliance things, some reporting things, how they're going to value retail sales. They were real vague in the bill. We want to make sure that there's certain things are excluded from retail sales, like particularly for us, any power that we generate that we push into the MISO market or that we get into tolling agreements or contracts, that we hope that they don't perceive those as retail sales. That those are typically wholesale sales. So we want to make sure, because it's not real clear, they don't really define retail sales. So we want to make sure that those things are well talked about through that comment period and through the review of the comments. So we've been working through some of those things just to make sure as they start setting formulas and start setting kind of the framework for how they're going to keep people in compliance and track sales and make sure that people are moving towards those goals, that stuff is all clear for the people that have to be involved in those things. So work through that, and then just got some task force things coming up with MMUA. We've been working on some strategic planning for the next year with MMUA. We've got some resiliency planning workshops coming up from that standpoint. We've been working on kind of finalizing the rate tracks, which you guys are going to see some of that stuff today. And then I do want to kind of just put on your radar screen the citizen survey. I'm going to get that back out to you guys. The last one that we had the results from 2 years ago. I want you guys to take a look at the questions that we asked. Typically, when you kind of go out and do a visit to the community with a survey, you want to keep generally the same questions so that you can keep a benchmark there. But one of the pieces I want you guys to think about is if there's other things in particular that you're interested in knowing about or hearing about or getting feedback from, let me know those things. But I would anticipate trying to put that thing out here later in the year, but I want to start the process of getting input from you guys, so I'll get that out here shortly so you guys can kind of think about some of those things. I thought we did a good job the last time of talking about solar and different things and going green and carbon free and some of that, so that was already in the first survey. So I think a lot of that stuff is still applicable, but there's other things that you guys have been interested in or getting some feedback from the community that make sure we're conscious about trying to add some. So that's kind of what I got in the short term.
Very good. Thank you, Jeremy. Next on the agenda is number 6, policies, where we review and approve any changes, and we have no policies for review and no policies needed to be changed. So we'll move on to agenda item 7, unfinished business. Also, nothing under agenda item 7. Moving on to 8. 8A is under new business. Approved requisition number 009571, primary metering cabinet. And that is going to be Dave.
Yeah, we have a primary metering cabinet that feeds that meters the lift station, the main lift station over here on Ontario by the ballpark. And we did failed a little bit this year, starting to fail, it's corroding, and we need to get that replaced. We have it all cleaned up and temporary for now, but this cabinet is for replacement of that.
Any
A
questions?
couple of quotes in there from Warner and Wesco, and we're recommending to go with a requisition from Wesco.
Any questions for Dave on that? If none, I'd entertain a motion.
Just a quick question on the difference in quote amounts. Porter States was that like 110?
Well, there's 2 quotes in there. There's actually 3 quotes in there, 110. They have a $40,000 option, a $34,000 option, and another $28,000 option. That's why the total ends up that way. And that
Okay.
one's goofy, but there's 3 different options in there.
Gotcha.
Good question, Don. Any other questions? If none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve requisition number 009571, the primary metering cabinet.
Second.
Motion by Don, seconded by Kathy to approve requisition 009571. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Requisition is approved. Thank you, Dave. Agenda item 8B, approve Hutchinson substation, 83 MVA transformer advertisement for bids. Dan, is that you?
It is.
Fire away.
This is in regards to the Hutch sub project. We're looking at doing that big expansion up there. DGR put together this bidding document for us for the transformer. It includes the advertisement for bids, bid, bond, performance bond forms, technical specs, and then ultimately the contract once we get to that point. So it's kind of all-encompassing the whole process. And instructions to the bidders, so hopefully they read those. And so we like to advertise for bids, and our goal is our intent is to put it out for bids, advertise next week, open bids in early August, and then we'll evaluate from there and the timeline, we'll see where we're at, and hopefully we'll have something to get into a contract with and get that transformer ordered, because it's going to be a long lead time. So that's why we wanted to hit this first. And there'll probably be more after this, breakers and so on and so forth. But this is the big ticket item, so this is the first item for the project to get done.
Is this, when does this line back on a commission agenda? Is it August already, or maybe September?
I would hope the end of August we'd have approved the bids, and then we'd have the contracts shortly after that.
So we answered the questions on the situation of the land in the area.
We have worked with DGR Engineering on that, and they adjusted the layout slightly more to the north, and kind of condensed it a little bit, so we don't have that issue to the south. And then we're now just working with some of the other things going on the north side of that property, but I think we're looking pretty good. Mark's been helping us out, and Dave and I talked to somebody from the DNR, bring them in, let them know what we were doing. They seemed we're okay with it, so we're far enough away out from the trail. Plus that trail is more on city property than DNR. So, but we just want to let them know and told them to keep it in the loop away because anything big changes. Plus when doing construction happens, we'll have to do something with the city and DNR on traffic control on that trail and some signage and whatnot once that starts. But so we get kind of busy up there probably next summer, I'm guessing, start doing some little property work, land work, things.
The only piece that we've talked about and we need to fall back up with the EDA is there's a parcel, a look-back provision in one of the parcels that Right Way Conveyor owns. They own that kind of parcel over there, and there's a portion that if they don't need it, it can be resorted back to the EDA. Up by that pond, there's a little snippet of land that we would like to probably procure before an expansion of an additional substation step down as that industrial park starts to expand. We're going to need some redundancy. out there, and so that may be a better alternative is to get a portion of that land back from the EDA, so that when we have to put a step-down transformer in that area, we have that. If we can get that accounted for through that railway EDA contract, then we wouldn't need to purchase some land to the south that we had originally talked about. So they've reconfigured the design to fit on mostly the current footprint that we have. If we can't get some of the parcel back in the EDA park, industrial park there, back from that, then we would need to procure the south portion of that impression so that we have that for the expansion of an additional redundancy transformer out there. Hopefully we can do the latter so that we don't have to worry about procuring the other land, since that's kind of been a slow process and some of that stuff. So we think this may be a better alternative. And then, so I need to reach out to Miles and talk with him a little bit about that. I talked to him several months ago about that piece, acquiring a small snippet up in that corner. You didn't think it was going to be necessarily a huge problem, but we want to make sure that we're doing it ahead of time, because as that industrial park expands, we're going to need land to step that down, that voltage on the transmission side. So it's kind of some moving parts, and then Mark and I have been kind of going back and forth with some of the rail authority stuff and just making sure that we're all clear on some of that stuff too. So I think we're in a pretty good spot. So
we have resolution to those land items before we accept bids? What's that timeline need to look like, or what's the order that it should come in at?
Well, I guess I don't have a definite answer on that. I mean, the items that are hanging out there, at least the parts that I've been involved with regard to the land by impressions, there really isn't much of an issue with that. There is a formality that would have to be gone through the McLeod Rail Authority. To make a long story short, basically as part of their deal with Dakota Rail in the 1990s, they were given an easement over a parcel of land by impressions with the condition that that land would revert back to the city of Hutchinson if a railway spur line was never built. Well, one was never built. So by the letter of that agreement, it's basically the city's anyway, but I think any title examiner would want the belt and suspenders approach that, hey, we actually get this signed off on from the rail authority to put it to bed permanently. But I feel confident going forward with it the way it is now. I think there's very, very little risk.
Yeah, they're not going to build a spur line to a rail that doesn't exist. So.
Correct.
So obviously, ideally, we'd like to have that stuff all wrapped up before we get into the contract.
You get a couple options, but you feel comfortable with either or both of them. That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, I mean, the piece with the rail authority is we have some, that issue is we have equipment running over, sitting on top of that line within the restructured diagram. So that's the issue with the rail authority piece. The other land portion for the future is either the south parcel or a snippet in the industrial park. We feel it's probably going to be quicker and more advantageous for us to carve out a piece in the EDA industrial park for a future substation. Because we're not talking acres, we're talking what type of footprint.
Yeah, it's a small, like this is just like a small distribution size substation. So kind of like we have a plant 2 or HTI, so it's a pretty small footprint. Just, yeah, a couple hundred feet by a couple hundred feet or something, 100 feet by 100 foot, something like that. But pretty small. And that's like kind of separate from this transmission project. This is something that came up during this. We said, hey, this may be an opportunity that if we do need to grow, we can tap into this new addition on the 115, but we'll need a spot for this other substation, this distribution substation. Where should we put it? And at the time, it was kind of leaning like we might have to buy some property to the south, and so let's get a little bit more so we can put that substation there. And then we said, well, there might be some opportunity on the east side in the industrial park. So that's kind of like a separate issue, but it's kind of where it came from, is this transmission project where we've got some opportunities now to grow our distribution side and tap into the 115 once this is done. So they're separate, but somewhat kind of related, but one's not going to slow down the other.
Good question. Any other questions? If not, I'd entertain a motion to advertise for bids.
I'll make a motion to advertise for bids for the Hutchinson Substation 83 MVA transformer.
I'll second.
Motion made by Bob and seconded by Matt to approve the advertisement for bids as presented. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Advertisement approved. Thanks, Dan. Agenda item 8C, discussion of rate track, and Jeremy, I'll turn that over to you. This would be on an email that we received, right?
Correct. Yep, I sent you 3 documents, kind of revised natural gas, kind of summary of the detail. And really the big piece of that I tried highlighting to you, which was that table 9 was revised with revenue projections relative to the cost of service study. Tried spelling out that really with the revised numbers, particularly on the natural gas side in the industrial class, that we were really closer to the cost of service study than what you guys had originally seen. So that's a good thing, but it still gives you guys a couple options to consider as far as that. But as far as on the electric side, which is what kind of walked through first, that stuff was, I think he had that stuff done about a week after our board meeting, so I've just been sitting on the electric stuff until the gas stuff was kind of all finalized and we sorted out a few of the numbers. So I'll kind of flip through the different customer classes on the electric side, and if you guys recall, you guys said, the last board meeting, you said, hey, we're gonna go with option B, and we wanna see what that looks like over a 3-year rate track. So what he's got in front of you are kind of the rate components and how those things would shift over a 3-year time span. So if we look at the residential class first, what he's obviously trying to do is blend and make sure everything is moving somewhat linearly, without having huge impacts either to the monthly charge, the energy charge, or the power cost adjustment. It's just something that obviously you guys know what the power cost adjustment is, so that isn't really changing in the rate track piece, at least on the residential side. So with the 3-year rate track right now, our current monthly customer charge is $16.90. Our energy rate is 7.8 cents. So what he's recommending to keep us in the option B, which is a 3.7% increase on the residential class. He's taking up the monthly charge 10 cents every month, and on the energy charge, he's taking that up about 3 mils, or roughly 3 to 4 tenths of a penny, and that gets you generating the revenue that you need each year out. Gets you that 3.7% increase, and then down below he's showing you the impact based on usage, what that does for the different customer classes as far as energy. And we've talked about this in the past. Right now our average retail or energy residential retail is about 730 kilowatt hours a month is about what we're running now. It is higher than the last cost of service study we did. But you can see he's got that gray bar in there on average. If you're using 700 kilowatt hours a month, it's about a $2.78 increase the first year, and then it obviously compounds a little bit for year 2 and year 3, so you're talking just under $3 a month for the average customer. Certainly if you run more usage, you're going to be a little bit higher because we're also increasing the energy charge to get us to the 3.7%, and if you're a lesser user, it's a less of an impact for you. So. But you can see, obviously, from the charts as well, he's keeping it somewhat flat as far as a percentage over all the usage customers based on the type of usage they have in the class. So that's what the residential rate looks like. On the small general class, which is one of our smaller businesses, that, and within this class, if you note on there, there's 2 blocks of energy charge. So we have 2 different energy charge rate components. One energy charge rate is for anything, the first 2,000 kilowatt hours is charged at one rate. Anything above that is charged at a second rate. And then so you can see as he runs out the 3-year rate track, right now we're at $21.60 for the customer charge. That ticks up just over $2, roughly $2.30 a month for the customer charge, and then that goes out over the 3 years, and then he ticks up incrementally both blocks of energy to get you to that 3.6% overall rate impact for a customer. Same thing on the energy side of things, and on average we've got, if you total up all the kilowatt hours divided by the customers we have, we're around 1,700 kilowatt hours a month in that class, so a little over double a residential customer. So you can see you're in that $6 to $7 more a month on the residential side, or on the small general side, from the small general. Taking up to our bigger customers, in this class we have a little bit more array of customers. as far as usage patterns, type of infrastructure, things of that. That's just encompasses more customer variation. Taking up the monthly charge just under $15, and then incrementally taking up the energy charge from 5.783 cents to 5.79 cents, and then up incrementally. And then the other piece, now that we're getting into the large general and industrial class, there's also a demand charge. And again, that demand charge is to cover all the increased infrastructure costs to the utilities for putting in larger size equipment, whether that's transformers, conductor, different things, because they just have more load, and so they require more things than a minimum system infrastructure requirement. So he's taking up the demand charge 50 cents a year. And that generates the appropriate revenue that we're looking at generating, and then obviously ultimately the 1.9% increase in the large general customer. So you can
Why such a larger jump in the facilities charge in this category than the others? So it's what, 20% almost?
Yeah.
20%.
Part of that's to cover have more of a consistent revenue stream coming in from those large customers to cover your minimum system requirements. So you're going to see a little bit larger jump on the customer charge piece. You can either do it that way, or you can keep the customer charge down a little bit and then increase your demand charge. Instead of 50 cents, it's 75. From that standpoint, I think what he's trying to do in all the classes is make sure that you're moving your, what I would call your fixed revenue piece, in concert with your fixed cost that it costs you to run your system. So he tries to balance that piece up. You could certainly change your revenue components, but then you're not matching up your revenue, your consistent revenue stream with your consistent fixed costs.
Which is what we did the last time.
Correct. Right.
Does it?
I mean, you can do different variations. I mean, you could leave the customer charge alone and you could increase the energy rate, but then you're going the opposite direction that you want from the cost of service rate.
I'd ask the question to Jeremy, does an answer to Don's question, could it also include the fact that there's much more variation in the load profiles of large generals, and that's why the difference in increased cost by percentage for monthly facilities charge is so wide? Because it costs a lot more infrastructure to service those customers?
It's not necessarily the variation, although that plays a factor. It's the fact that a minimum system requirement for this customer class is more demanding than a residential customer. They have more load, so the minimum system requirement for those customers in that class is greater, right?
Makes sense.
So he's trying to keep the variation of the demand charge from getting out of whack as well. I think, you can play again with the demand charge, but again, the demand charge really is just supposed to be fluctuation in load for a customer. So sometimes you may be using a small load, and then all of a sudden certain parts of the year or certain parts of the month the load is significantly higher. So he's trying to make sure that the demand charge is balancing towards that. We also have that component of 75%, which is in our class as well, versus, so if your load goes down below, let's say some parts of the month you have huge load, right? You're burning a lot of electricity, and then there's other months where you're shut down or there's something seasonal or whatever the case may be. We're still charging 75% of your monthly max charge again, and that part is a cost recovery for the system that we're putting in place. Again, what's important that we have is a lot of utilities, when we're putting in infrastructure, particularly these larger customers, they're making the customers pay for all that infrastructure up front. Anything above a minimum system, those additional costs, whether, hey, if we have to add in this size of transformer, it costs us another $80,000 above a minimum system. A lot of times some utilities will pass that on and say, you're responsible for anything above this standard transformer for our system. We don't do that. We cover all the costs of everything up front, and then we hopefully recover that over time. So with the demand charges, that's supposed to be accommodating. Problem is it's not always standardized with this fluctuation we have in this class. Sometimes if people have a lot of load, we'll recover that over 7 to 8 years, the infrastructure costs. If you have really low load, you have a customer that's really up and down seasonally, it may take us longer than that. But we're trying to be fair as far as a consistent general demand that gets us the revenue that we need to generate to cover the cost of the variation in the infrastructure that's going in for those customers. The only other option you have to do that is you really have to start narrowing down your customer classes more to even more like customers. But then you start getting into, like in this class, you probably could parlay this out into 3 other rate classes if you really wanted to get that specific and then create more similarity in those. But you would still have seasonal rate load as well. Sometimes it fits in this too, that doesn't fit real well with the cost structure. And then you have to determine, are you going to have seasonal rates and how do people pay for infrastructure if they're not using load. And so he looks at all the variation in this class particularly and says, okay, this is what you're generating in revenue. This is where your cost of service is for that whole rate class. To try to make it equitable across that class, you need to change these couple rate components for everyone modestly to get you that 1.9%. So you will see kind of a little bit more fluctuation, and that's why on this one too, he doesn't also show you by usage, it's by load factor. Because the load factor becomes a significant player with these large customers now, because we have a demand charge that we don't have with the residential, the small general class. So it's not as much about usage as it is about what's the demand on the system and what type of infrastructure does it take to cover that. Same with the industrial. Industrial is the same thing, same type of customers, larger infrastructure, larger demand on the system. The nice thing with some of our industrial classes, there's a little bit more consistency in their load profiles. They don't have as much swings. Some of them in our large general, so there's a little bit more consistency from a revenue standpoint generated from the energy charge. Although we do have, a 10% fluctuation in a large customer is, significant, where 10% in a small general is, you don't even notice it. So I don't really like talking in percentages when you're talking about different customers, because it skews really lower. But then this is the 3-year rate track for the large industrial again, getting us to a 1.9% increase in overall revenue collected. You can see increases the customer charge about $44 a month to keep us moving towards the fixed cost of service. And then same in this situation, it ticks up the energy charge a hair and then the demand charge as well to get you to that 1.9%. If the board says, hey, we're not comfortable with the 1.9%, we want something less, we want it to be 1%, he will either adjust the demand charge down or the energy charge. He will not want you guys to change the customer charge, because again, that's the fixed revenue that isn't seasonally dependent or isn't dependent on people's manufacturing habits, or we just talked about Minnesota Specialties. They're up and down, from month to month, whether our infrastructure is the same to service them as it would be. And again, he also shows it by load factor, because there's obviously load in there too. So that's what the industrial looks like with the 3-year rate track. Any questions on any of the electric side? Any ones you want to go back to?
We're good.
Okay. Then we'll head over to the natural gas side. So I did send you guys 2 variations. I sent you one that's now a 0.4% increase, particularly on the industrial customers. If you guys recall, you didn't want to do any change on the residential side, any change on the commercial side, because they were either real close to cost of service or just a hair over, hair under. So, they looked fairly good from an equitability standpoint, and also we're generating enough revenue within a small tolerance that is covering their cost to service them. So really, we're talking about on this side, there isn't a significant change for the most part. So he's still recommending to get us to balance out our cost components. Some changes on our residential and commercial. It doesn't generate any more revenue for us. It just keeps us moving like we did in the last cost of service study, incrementally increasing our monthly charge to keep a consistent revenue stream coming in to match our cost of minimum system, but then he reduces the commodity charge that we're charging. So in this situation, he's got us ticking up 60 cents a year on the customer charge for the residential customer, but then backing down 10 cents in the MCF on the customer. So you can see down below, really from a monthly charge, if you're a low user, because we've increased the monthly charge, you may have a 10-20% increase. But if you're a higher user, which most of our people are, on average, we're in that 6 MCF, we'll see either no impact or a couple, 10 cent, a negative 10 cents on the bill or 20 cents. So very marginal on that. But there will be, particularly on any time you're increasing the monthly charge, it will impact the low users, whether it's electric or gas, a little bit. Same thing on the commercial side, again, moving towards the cost of service study with the rate components. He is recommending increasing the customer charge, about $12, and then reducing, in this one, the commodity charge, almost 30 cents. And then, again, it doesn't generate any more revenue for that class, but it starts being less dependent on the commodity or the sales of physical gas that are more seasonal than the monthly charge. Any questions on those two? Those will be the same numbers that you see in this one, or the 1% increase, because we're not looking for any increases for discussion on the residential commercial. On the industrial class, again, because with the latest projected numbers, we're closer to the cost of service study, he's saying here's an option you guys can look at if you don't want to go to the 1%. The industrial class is 2.5% off, so as him and I talked about it, even if you want to do a 1%, which was your original question, that really puts them at cost of service study in 3 years, because in 3 years, if we don't do any rate change, they're going to be above the 2.5%. But he wanted to give you the other option, one that you guys asked for, and another one that says you can be less aggressive on the industrial customer class and still move that direction. You're not going to get the cost of service study in 3 years, but it just helps you move a little bit that way. So we wanted to give you the two options for consideration. So in the industrial class, we have really the three big industrial customers. This first customer is one we just talked about earlier. They are not a contract customer, so they're buying it at retail. They have one meter that's basically runs their production side that's in the industrial class, and then they've got one meter that's more office, that's in the large general class. So they got a meter split between two classes. But if you're looking at that class, or that one customer in the industrial class, he's saying that one really is closer to cost of service than the other two. This one really only requires a 0.1% increase if you want to consider that. When we did the last cost of service study, they were significantly over. We were over collecting from them based on our retail rates. And so we addressed that in the glide pass the last time around. We're bringing them back down to more cost of service study. So this one is, when I look at this, for all intents and purposes, they're really at cost of service here. 0.1% is minor, but again, same concept. And all he's really recommending is, if you want to consider something at an overall 0.4% increase for that class, just increasing the monthly charge a little bit. You don't really have to do anything from the commodity side or the demand charge. That's really where it needs to be for those guys. The second industrial customer, this one's a little bit further off, but not significantly. He's, again, in this situation too, he's only recommending if you want to do something and move that class a little bit towards cost of service, this industrial customer, which is a contract customer, you could just increase their monthly charge. But you can, at this point, you can leave the commodity charge and the demand charge alone. And that would generate, based on his numbers, a 0.3% increase annually. And then the last customer, which is the furthest one away from cost of service study, because they have the largest infrastructure, the largest volume. This one, he was saying, if you want to move that, the majority of it's in this customer, that's away from cost of service. That if you want to move that 0.4%, which is, these guys are really the driving factor in that class. So it's nothing earth-shattering to you guys. There's 70% of the volume in that class. You could increase their meter charge, their transportation charge as well, and then the demand charge. So really, in the industrial class, he's saying if you want to move in that class, all the other rate components match up pretty well, except for the fixed revenue charge that you're charging for the system that's in place for the large users. So that's what a 0.4% looks like for the industrial class. The other one, which is the one that the commission wanted to see, was really the 1%. Again, residential and the commercial are the same, just ticking up the monthly charge, backing down the energy charge in both to get you at a 0% increase in revenue, so essentially revenue neutral in those customer classes. And then with the 3 industrial customers, again, if we're moving towards 1% increase, then you're looking at increasing the customer charge, and now you're starting to impact the demand charge on them as well. And that gets you to, so they're taking up 50 cents a year on the demand charge with an increase in the customer charge, and that gets you a 0.5% increase on the one customer. That's on our retail rates. So you can see he's not impacting the retail rates at all. That's the retail rates don't need to be adjusted. And then for our second to the largest customer, to get to the 1% overall, 0.8% increase on this customer would be increasing the peak demand charge a little bit more than 50 cents. So you're all just under 92 cents roughly-ish on increasing demand charge, and then increasing the meter charge by about $107 a month, and that gets you about 0.8% increase. And then the largest customer in that class is increasing the demand charge 50 cents, and then increasing the meter charge, but leaving the commodity charge alone. And this one, he's actually, if you want to get to 1%, he's saying you need to tick up the transportation charge now a little bit, because we're running the significant volumes on the pipeline. And we set our transportation charges at 20 cents for transportation, the transmission, and 27 cents for the distribution system. So that uptick would be on the distribution side of things. He's saying if you really want to get to 1% for that customer, with the increased cost of distribution and materials and things, you need to start ratcheting up a little bit of the distribution charge for transportation for them running the pipeline.
Well, we know we're far below other options.
Correct, we are. And again, the whole mindset of his changing his rate structure is to mirror our cost components to run the utility. So that's his goal. That's the only thing he looks at, is mirroring up those cost components relative to the revenue that you're generating for each of those components and making sure that they're in line. So that's where you see some of the variation based on the different classes.
So Jeremy, the second slide deck that you just showed us, the one that we're on right now, is the 1%.
Correct.
As a class.
Yep.
And that's what we asked for out of last month's meeting. In addition to that, you showed us the one prior to that for 0.4%, and that was because of new data that was presented.
Correct.
Right?
Yep.
So it's the same thought process, as just new data presented in the first one.
Correct.
From the revenue standpoint.
Yeah, so when you looked at the first set of data I gave you guys, was that the industrial class was 8.7% away from cost of service study, which led to the 1%, let's look at a 1% rate track, and that gets you a 3% increase over 3 years, but still away from that. With the revised data, now they're only 2.5% away. So that's the difference in one of the recommendations that he's given you as an alternative for consideration on that.
Is this an answer you want from us today?
No, this is just discussion today. So that's why I had it just for a discussion topic. But I would say, again, to keep on a similar timeline, if you guys are looking to make some decision, I would have something decided by the end of July at the board meeting, because in July, because then what would happen is I need to bring something to the board for consideration. We need a resolution format like we did last time with the rate structures that you're comfortable with. We would look to approve that at the July meeting. And then I would submit that stuff down to the city, Mark and Matt, and then the city council has 30 days after we make formal ratification of rate changes or rate adjustments for the city council then to take some action if they'd like to. So then, at the end of the July, I'm sure Matt would be up here, he would know, hey, we've got now through the month of August to have something talked about at the city council. If we follow the same process we did last time, I went down in the first meeting in August. I talked in front of the board about what was approved up here at the commission, why we're looking to make some of the changes. They typically heard the information, said, yep, we'll think about it, we'll talk about it, and then we'll take some action if we decide to at the next council meeting, which would be the second council meeting in August. And then if that process flowed that way, in September we would work on setting the new rates in our system and getting those things ready to go for an October 1st billing, if we follow the October timeline of fall billing changing. Certainly if we need to push it back, we certainly can if you guys don't feel comfortable or the council doesn't. So, but really the starting point is you guys making some determination, and then that sets the 30 days in motion. So, good question.
I think next meeting is fair.
Yeah.
Would be for me.
So, or if there's any other considerations that you guys talk about, we can certainly do another option as well, but
Got everything covered with that information.
I think so, is what we asked for, and a little bit more with the...
So as far as the two options, which one was what did he recommend? One or the other?
so when I asked him, he recommended you 4/10, says you're
4/10.
fine with the 4/10%. But he also said on the other side of his mouth that even a 1% you're close to cost of service anyway, because they're almost 2.5 ways. So, but again, he's always comes at it from, he understands we're a public utility. You guys report to the community that moving gradually towards the glide paths maybe is a better alternative than getting there. And that just means that when the next cost of service study comes, you may be
Right.
in the same boat like we are, right? Like
3 years from now.
Correct.
We'll just be revisiting again.
So it's really kind of the final decision on your guys' comfort level.
All right, so the ask for the commissioners today is to consider that information that Jeremy presented. If you have questions or concerns, talk with him in between this meeting and the July meeting, and be prepared to vote for a rate track at our next commission meeting. Any other questions or thoughts on the rate track? As I mentioned earlier in the meeting, we have a new agenda item, 8D, which is going to be approve awarding the bid to Nelson Technologies, Inc. for filter and meter skids for Hutchinson / HCP natural gas interconnect station. This was an email we got yesterday, and John, that's your agenda item.
First, I want to thank the commissioners for allowing me to bring this forward for your consideration today. I really do appreciate it. This was the second time we went out for bid, as you recall, for the meter skid and filter skids for the Hutchinson Heartland Corn interconnect station. We had two responsible bidders, Nelson Technologies, Inc. and Northland Industrial Specialties, LLC. As you can see from the numbers, they came in higher than they should have, but Nelson's bid $403,959.49, which includes the cost of the meter skid, the filter skid, and delivery of both skids, and the expense of the performance bond. Northland Industries, $392,252, which includes the same items. The biggest difference between the two, except for the $12,000, is that Nelson Technologies was promising a 16-week delivery upon receipt of order, and Northland is 22 weeks. So if we get these things, if we're able to get these ordered in the middle of July and start getting drawings back, we're looking 16 weeks, we're looking at November delivery, 22 weeks, we're looking at December delivery, end of December. So we would be down there in January and February building the station, and that kind of gives Heartland Corn some heartburn because they think they're going to be flowing by December. So I would ask that you approve the Nelson Technologies bid for two reasons. One, The delivery is much quicker, which allows us to get the station flowing that much faster. And then second, Nelson's bid a complete SGM4 specific gravity meter, while Northland only bid an SGM3. I know that's just one difference in number, but it's the SGM3 is just the meter, where the SGM4 is the entire meter, enclosure, heater, test gas facilities, all the tubing and piping that goes with it. So it more than makes up the $11,000 for the difference in the SGM meters. So if we could approve that today, that would be fantastic.
John, remind me, on this relationship we have with Heartland, it's a contract that we have in place, and they reimburse us for all materials,
100%.
et cetera?
Yes.
And they're okay with...
And they're aware of this. Yes, they are.
And they're okay going with the more expensive...
They're fine. They're happy with the more expensive. Matter of
6
fact,
weeks
right now,
out.
they're expediting everything
Good.
down there. Their money is no object.
Yeah, my only question was along that line, so other than that,
No,
I'm good.
And when does the reimbursement occur? Do we,
Once I'm billed, because the delivery and there's some changes that's going to occur. I know there will be. We'll bill them on final bill from the contractor.
okay. It's nice to see this project moving along.
Slow, but at least it's moving. I know they've chosen their contractor. They were going to award that bid this week. I don't know, but their contractors, they want them to bring on 2 crews, double the cost to get it done this year. So they're serious.
Any other questions for John? If none, I'd entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve awarding the bid to Nelson Technologies for the filter and meter skids for the Hutchinson HCP natural gas interconnect station.
Second.
Motion made by Don and seconded by Kathy to approve that as presented. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Actions approved. Thank you, John, for that.
Thank you.
Is there any additional items we'd like to add under new business? Hearing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
I'll second.
A motion by Matt, seconded by Don, or excuse me, by Bob, to adjourn the meeting. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Once you're adjourned, I do have a comment I was going to make earlier. It's
Meeting's
not part of-
adjourned.
Not part of the meeting.
Meeting's adjourned. You're up,
I'm
John.
sorry, I'll wait till next month, I'm sorry.
Angie quit typing, so we're good.
Well, this is just information. I think a meeting ago, we talked about Northern Natural Gas in for a rate increase. They settled through FERC conference at 32.5% increase for small customers. It hasn't reached the final approval, but that's where it's gonna be. 32.5%.
We're gonna look pretty good then.
Wow.
That's
Yes,
a big number.
Wow.
There's one of our counterparts.